We're now joined by Max Olson from ESPN with us on 365 Sports. Max, do you feel like Ohio State's a heavy, not Vegas favorite, but a team that some people think might pop Texas pretty good? Do you get that same impression?
I think so. And I don't know that that's necessarily about Texas, struggling to put away Arizona State so much as it is. I think people probably view that Rose Bowl as like that's a national championship caliber matchup, and it wasn't close. I think that it's everyone's back on the Ohio State bandwagon after two playoff games of like, oh wow, look at that, they're finally playing their best football, and I think certainly their best football, like Oregon just had no answer for. So I think it's more out of respect for just the unstoppability of Jeremiah Smith and all the playmakers they have, and the way that I think Ohio State could certainly finish with the number one defense in college football this year with Jim Knowles. So I think it's more out of respect for the Buckeyes than out of just like, oh, Texas can't match up with them, because physically Texas totally can match up with Ohio State.
Max, you've just done all this portal work. I know it still goes on, but it calms down a little bit right now. And then Carson Beck jumps in.
God, I hope so.
Yeah. You were like, when you see Carson Beck, you're like, oh, hey, this is a big story. Or do you go, oh, come on. Like, can we stop for a second? Can we just stop?
That is how my wife feels. Yeah, that is certainly. We were at lunch today when that broke, and I had to break out the laptop and disappeared for 90 minutes to deal with all that. Yeah, I mean, and I think we saw it even with Cam Ward last year, where he announced he was going pro on New Year's Day, and then all of a sudden he's going to Miami like a week later. I think that you heard a lot of rumors about Miami being interested in Carson Beck in December, and I felt like that was kind of dispelled by Carson Beck declaring that he was going in the draft. But here we are. I think there's a pretty good chance he's going to end up at Miami unless someone comes in and makes him, a Godfather offer here in the next few days. I would imagine that's going to be the move for him and for the Hurricanes. And you can understand the pitch, obviously, after what Cam Ward did. I think Cam Ward a year ago, he was looking at his situation and feeling like he was hoping to be a day two pick if he went pro. And I think that's probably where Carson Beck is right now, because Carson Beck is not going to be able to throw a football until like March at the earliest. And so how do you go through the draft process and improve your stock when you're up against that? So I think that what Cam did to improve the way he was viewed in 1 year at Miami, I think Carson Beck probably would be chasing that same kind of thing, whether it's at Miami or somewhere else. So surprising. But and I think if he didn't have the elbow injury, you'd probably say he's the best player in the portal. But that'll be a process here coming back from that.
Max, did you have any type of reaction to seeing Texas Tech named as maybe one of the suitors for him?
I'd be really surprised by that. I know obviously Baron Morton has dealt with some injuries in his career. I don't know that going after Carson Beck is necessarily the solution to that when you consider that Beck is not going to be able to go through spring ball wherever he's going next. Obviously Texas Tech is shoving the chips all in with this portal class, but I don't think that quarterback is necessarily like a lingering priority there. I would be very surprised. Not impossible, but I'd be very surprised unless they were just getting really concerning reports on kind of how Barron's looking. Like I think they're pretty comfortable with him being the guy that they are building this all around to chase a Big 12 championship in 25.
Yeah, no, I feel that way too. But I wanted to ask just because that got mentioned, and certainly a lot of eyes opened up like, what? Wait a second, Texas Tech, what? But in terms of the portal, UCF has gone really heavy with Scott Frost. Oklahoma State's gone heavy with Gundy trying to turn this thing around. Texas Tech's gone in super heavy. Is anything from that league in particular jumped out to you at all, maybe more so than elsewhere, or just kind of maybe a theme emerging with some of these teams who have decided like, hey, you know what? People question Deion flipping a whole roster, but damn if it didn't work maybe a little bit. Kenny Dillingham, same thing. Like what was kind of taboo now seems like, it's not maybe as taboo anymore.
It's funny. You hear so many coaches now saying like, oh, we're really trying to recruit production over potential out of the portal. And it's like, yeah, well, Kurt Cignetti was saying that a year ago, and look how it worked out for him. So right. I think everyone looked at what Indiana did, and certainly what Kenny Dillingham did going into year one at Arizona State really paid off in year two. Same thing with Deion Sanders at Colorado. Like, yeah, I think you've got some pretty real evidence there that if you can get the right guys that have multiple years, especially, and you can kind of not have a good hit rate on that and keep them in the program and stuff, you got a chance to do something special. Now, obviously, you see the disaster at Florida State. That's not really scaring people off of like recruiting the portal. Like, I think people look at the success stories of this past year and say, man, if we're willing to spend a little bit of money here and we've got a little money as we head into revenue sharing, we can really upgrade at a bunch of spots. And so I think you're just going to continue to see more and more teams say, all right, let's go get 20 guys out of the portal and see how much better that makes us. And I think people are a lot more comfortable doing that now than they were a couple of years ago. And so, yeah, I think Oklahoma State, you probably especially with literally a brand new coaching staff around Mike Gundy, you're like, okay, they're probably going to make a lot of changes to this roster. UCF, lost a lot when they went through the coaching change, and so they had to add a lot. And Texas Tech is they feel like they're really close, and they're tired of coming up short. So they're making a massive investment in this portal class.
Is there somebody that has completely surprised you at how aggressive they've been in the portal, at least so far? Probably Texas Tech. Probably Texas Tech. I would say part of that is just because even if you've got money to spend, even if you've got a lot of, even if you've done your homework in terms of evaluating who you want to go get, it's still not easy to go get them and to get them on campus and for the official visit in Lubbock and get them locked down when they can go to all these other places. And so they have been competitive for guys that legitimately were at the top of their board. And I think there are players they are bringing in, like Howard Sampson at tackle from North Carolina, like Romello Hyde at outside linebacker, Reggie Virgil, like they are bringing in guys that they feel like can be all Big 12 caliber players. And so, I think that one's been surprising because you knew they were going to try to pull it off, but they got really high caliber players. I think in this cycle, it'd be fascinating to see how the pieces all fit together. But yeah, that one has certainly impressed me. I think the other one that you'd have to say is right up there in terms of being best portal class this year is probably LSU. And LSU kind of sat things out a little bit last year. They didn't recruit a ton of transfers for the 24 team, and obviously they aren't happy with how that season finished. And they went out and signed a bunch of guys that I would have in top 1 or 2 or 3 at their position in this cycle. So that's a team that has gotten a lot better in the last month.
You know what surprised me about Tech, Max, was, a lot of times, that you kind of re-recruit guys that you missed on or had a conversation with. They went all over the place. This wasn't just guys they were necessarily familiar with from recruiting. Yeah. Okay, who's the best safety? Who's the best tackle we can get? They went for that and not just for, okay, who's a guy who's familiar with Lubbock, Texas.
Sure, and I think the theme of the haul for them is they're all guys that primarily that have 1 year left, that are viewed as potential NFL draft picks. That even if they're viewed as possible 6th or 7th round picks, they're guys that have NFL potential and are trying to come back and put it all together. And so you got some really motivated guys. I think Lee Hunter from UCF, the defensive tackle, he is a proven game wrecker in Big 12 games. But you're right, they recruited kind of from all over the country. They didn't really have to have Texas ties, and I think they did a great job of meeting their needs. To get Quentin Joyner from USC, who is a kid that's coming home. Chance Carter from Parker Heights is I think going to be a great replacement for Jalen Conyers at tight end. The offensive line, defensive line took a ton of players in the secondary. I think it's an interesting strategy. It probably reminds me of Ole Miss a little bit a year ago of just trying to take guys that you feel like are pretty close to being NFL players, and can they come in and give you their very best football next year.
How much did that Diego Pavia JUCO year doesn't count situation kind of blow your mind initially? And I guess what's the latest on that, Max? Is that just still specifically for him? Are the floodgates going to open up? Like how does all that work at this point, a couple weeks since that story broke?
Yeah, pretty surprising. But obviously the NCAA, the win-loss record in courtrooms is not very good lately. So Diego probably felt like he had a chance here. The way that is currently being applied is that the NCAA gave out a blanket waiver. So it's for players that played junior college football in the past and were going to have their eligibility expire at the end of 2024. Those players are getting an extra year. So if you were going to be out of school, if you had to go pro, this gives you a chance to come back for one more year if you want to. And we've seen some pretty good players like Malik Benson leaving Florida State, or Rasul Faison, running back from Utah State, who's going to South Carolina. Benson's going to Oregon. Like, there's been some pretty good players who probably were looking at going to the draft and not sure how that would go for them, who are now going to be able to cash in and come back for one more year of college.
Malik Benson is more hype though than production. Sure. I'm not going to blame him for what happened last year, but for Alabama, he was like the fifth wide receiver there.
Well, yeah, Florida State was asking him to be a number one, and he was not a number one, definitely. But with Oregon having Evan Stewart and some pretty good talent back, it's more of a complimentary piece for them to help replace the production of a Trayshawn Holden or a Tez Johnson a little bit. So I think that's a decent take for them late. Obviously, there's a lot of really good and really expensive receivers in the portal this year. So, yeah, probably a pretty good deal for Malik Benson to be able to land another spot like that.
I don't know how you keep up with it, Max. It's amazing what you do with that portal, and keep it going, because that summary was great, and I know you got to go right back into it like immediately. And so keep doing what you're doing. We appreciate your time when we get it. Have a great day.
Hey, thank you guys. Always a pleasure.
That's Max Olson, ESPN.com.